Hi, Joy here. I was going to talk this evening about reading. So, I'm a homeschool mom. We have 8 children, and I've taught 4 of them how to read. Some of them are too little to have learned how to read yet, and some of them learned how to read in public school. So, I taught 4 readers, and it's something I'm passionate about. I like teaching to read, it's my favorite thing. I'm much more qualified to give tips about teaching how to read than I am on teaching math. If I was going to give you my number one tip about teaching math, I would tell you hire a math tutor. Number one tip for teaching math, hire a math tutor. But I can give you some tips about teaching reading because I like it. It's fun. So that's my qualification. I've been homeschooling 10 years and I've taught 4 kids how to read and I enjoy it. It's my favorite thing. So when I first started homeschooling my kids, I thought, how do you teach kids how to read? And so you do learn how to do it when you start homeschooling your kids, and it's pretty fun. I like it. It's like one of those things that is so fun and valuable to experience for yourself with your children. It's something that you get to take part in. And it's one of those like when you see them take their first steps, it's like that. Like seeing them read their first chapter book, seeing them read their first easy reader type books, seeing them sound out their first words is amazing. It's like my favorite thing. So I have 5 tips for teaching your kids how to read. And so let's see, disclaimers. Let's see. I'm just a homeschool mom, taught 4 kids how to read. I don't have a college education. So I'm sure there's teachers out there who have their tip videos on teaching how to read, but this is just a homeschool mom tips about reading, stuff I do with my kids. And my kids are great readers, so something's working, so I feel pretty good about it. And let's see, what else for a disclaimer? Let's see. This would be for kids. I do have kids with special needs, but not necessarily special needs related to reading. Now, comprehension. We do have some issues regarding comprehension because I have kids who have autism. So that there is like some comprehension that can become a struggle. So if you're struggling with some special needs, then some of these might not be tips that are going to be as useful for you. So that's something to keep in mind. But they may, then again, they may be useful for you too. So, okay, top 5 tips from me for teaching your kids how to read. Number 1, be consistent. I have notes here in my lap, so I'm going to glance down at my notes as I read. I jotted some notes about things that I wanted to mention. So be consistent. So what I mean by that is you're going to be much better off to take 10, 15, 20 minutes a day working with your kids on reading every day. 10, 20 minutes a day, every day, or almost every day, than to try to get with them for an hour once or twice a week. That's too long for little ones to sit for one. And they just need that repetition every day. So consistency is super important. And consistency of don't take the whole summer off and don't take like weeks and weeks and weeks for like Thanksgiving and Christmas and that kind of thing. If it happens, it happens. But I wouldn't recommend taking like weeks and weeks of school off at a time when you're teaching a child how to read, because they're going to lose some of the stuff that you've taught them and you're going to have to backtrack. And if you can get them reading and staying consistent with it, you're not going to have to relearn and relearn and relearn. So consistency is my number one tip. Be consistent. Number two, read to them often. So before they can read, we're talking obviously bedtime stories. We're talking cuddling up on the couch after lunch. We're talking read, 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 read all the time. Read to your kids. And even after they can read for themselves, read to your kids. I still read with my high schooler. We're reading the seven habits of effective people, that book, Stephen Covey book. We're reading that together right now. We read together as a family every morning during Bible study. So everyone in our house reads together and independently, but we all read together. And I think it's a good bonding experience to share good books together and talk about them. I think you can pick up stuff off of each other that you wouldn't have picked up had you not read it together. I think it's special, quiet time that you can spend with each other. And I just think it's relaxing. It's one of my favorite parts of my homeschool day is it's generally just the rhythm of our day. I'm not like a strict schedule person, but the rhythm of our day usually lends itself to me doing a story time, usually shortly before lunch or shortly after lunch. And so we usually have a story time. And the older ones tend to fall out of like the story time. I usually meet with like my older kids at a separate time. But right now I have a bunch of kids who are listening. We're reading the Harry Potter series right now, a bunch of the kids. And we're working our way through that, and they enjoy it and I enjoy it. It's super fun to read that together, and I think they look forward to it and I look forward to it. I enjoy reading with them. So tip 2 was read to them often, even after they already know how to read. Keep reading to them and foster that love of reading and that love of learning and that love of cuddling up on the couch together and reading. Okay, so that's the first 2. Tip number 3, don't stress about how old they are. I have been surprised to hear moms say, oh, my kid is 5 and they're not reading yet. Or my kid is 6 and they're not reading yet. Like, why are you worried about it already? Now, this is where the disability thing comes into play. If you're concerned that your child has a disability and you feel like you need to be either doing something extra or bringing in some kind of resource or some kind of help, by all means, if you're concerned about something. But if you just feel like you haven't been consistent, or, if they're getting to be 10 years old and they're not reading yet, maybe you need to be a little concerned. But I think sometimes moms, and moms who are just getting into homeschooling, they worry so much and they put such high expectations on themselves and they put so much pressure on themselves and on their children, and it's sad. And it's such a special, fun time of learning when kids are learning how to read. So don't do that to yourself. Don't stress. Be persistent, be consistent, but stress is not going to help you and it's not going to help your child. So don't do that to yourself. So that was tip number 3. And tip number 4 is stop if you feel yourself getting frustrated. And for someone who hasn't taught anyone to read, or maybe who isn't a parent, they'd be like, how could you get frustrated? When you have taught your kid what sound the letter F makes 50 times and they still don't remember what sound the letter F makes, you can start to get a little bit frustrated. Or you have a sight word, the, and they keep saying, you can start to twitch a little bit and you're kind of like, all right, we need a break, right? So if you feel your stress level start creeping up, you need to stop and take a break. And that goes for any kind of teaching. If you're teaching math and someone's crying, if you're crying or your kid is crying, you need to stop and take a break. If you're teaching your kindergartner or first grader how to read and someone's crying, you need to take a break. Like the rest of the day, probably. If someone's crying, you need to either change activities to something completely different, or you need to completely stop the learning for the time being and go have lunch or go play outside or whatever. Because growing is not without its aches and pains. And that goes for mental growth, spiritual growth, and physical growth. And these little kindergartners who are learning things are doing a lot of mental growth. And it's not easy. And sometimes it tries our patience and it tries their patience. And so it's hard sometimes. And so sometimes you just need to go, you know what? We need a break. Let's go to the park. Or whatever you need to do. So keep it light. Keep it fun. Take a break when you need to take a break. And stop. Stop. If you're frustrated, go do something else. And my fifth and final tip is utilize a lot, utilize a lot of resources. So you don't want to sit your kindergartner down for 20 minutes straight with a workbook and have them practicing sight words and then reading you a short story and then practicing writing and then circling matching words. And then you don't want them sitting with a workbook for 20 minutes. It's too much for them. So I would say, read them a story. This would be an example lesson would be have them read you a story, have them listen to an audiobook, and there's different podcasts and stuff like that out there. And I'm going to do a whole series about reading. This is just going to be the first in a series about reading. And I'm going to share a bunch of resources and things that I used to teach my kids how to read. And so anyway, I'll share a bunch of resources over time here. But so what a session might look like is you sit down, you practice some sight words, you have them, I use a certain curriculum. So I might do half the lesson, practice some sight words, and then we might play bingo with sight words. Then we might get out the Play-Doh and make different letters out of the Play-Doh and say what sound the letters make, right? And then we might listen to a story on audiobook. And then we might have a break and go play outside, right? And then later in the day, we might do math or whatever. And then we might come back and do some more reading. And I might have them read me a very easy story or something like that. But I'll show what our stuff looks like. But I just thought I would share some really simple, easy tips for teaching your kids to read, some basic guidelines, and I'm excited to share some of our favorite resources for teaching kids how to read, some of our favorite books, chapter books, like read alouds that I've read my kids, curriculum that I used to teach my kids how to read. So I think reading series is going to be really fun only because it's something that I'm really passionate about. I love teaching my kids how to read. And one of my favorite parts of my day is sitting down and reading to my kids. So I'm excited to share it with you guys. So that's going to be it for tonight. I'll talk to you guys later.